Hello everyone and welcome back to the Great Book of Grudges. My name is Nathan and we're back with another Total War Warhammer video. Today we're going to talk about the possibility of minor faction packs. These are different little races which could act as their own but might only have one legendary lord or two at the very most. They could be independent, but they could also be attached to, say, for example, another race too. There's a lot to talk about, and we did talk about this briefly yesterday, so there'll be a little talk about that and then moving on to its own thing. So yesterday we talked about the possibility of Games Workshop splitting up the Dogs of War into its own minor factions. This was kind of evident as we saw this in the second to last Warhammer the Old World update post, where it looks like some of the factions have new heraldry. This is possibly going to be Estalia, Talia, Araby, and Sartosa. And that made me think, what if this is something that they've got planned for Warhammer 3? We already discussed that in that video, and the conclusion that I kind of came up with was, yes, a Dogs of War faction, but then expanding upon it with a Talia faction, Estalia faction, a Araby faction. This is how to make a DLC for a DLC in a very unique way. I think the player base themselves would be into the idea, as it would then expand upon the world and take away all the, well, let's be honest, Empire clones. There are way too many Empire clones as it is, but let's look at the alleged Immortal Empires map and see how this could actually work by going into some specifics for some of the races and factions. So this is what's supposed to be the Warhammer Immortal Empires campaign, and what we know is that pretty much most of the missing factions, if not all of them, are human, barring, say, for example, the Hobgoblins, but we'll get to that in a little bit. Since most of them are human, they won't really need too much work. Keep in mind that a lot of the rigs stay the same when it comes to the models themselves, and a lot of them could do with just basic retexturing and reskinning. However, yes, some models would need to be introduced with new type of animations and so on. It very much depends on what you're going for, and that's simple enough if they're going to make it, say, for example, half the price of a normal race pack, because these aren't supposed to be big full-on fledged races. They're supposed to be minor races with just minor factions to be able to play with. So if we can look at this, we can see that there is a lot. We've already known this map for a while, and we know where all the races are. We know where the High Elves are, the Dark Elves, and so on. Now, as it stands with most of the races that have been implemented so far, barring Cathay and Kislev, I would say, most of them are pretty much done, because, well, there's been a lot of source material over the years, but there has been a decent amount of DLC. The only thing that's really missing is, say, for example, Lord packs and Hero packs, because that's the main majority of things when it comes to, say, for example, the Empire or the Dwarfs. Yes, they are missing some units, but they did say that they want to support Warhammer 3 for many years. And how are they going to support Warhammer 3 for many years if, well, there's no units to implement? It doesn't justify the usual Lord pack, does it? Where it comes with a few different units, 2 legendary lords and sometimes an FLC legendary lord? I'm talking about this in a very realistic sense. I know some people would get annoyed by that, but keep in mind, if they're not going to be releasing DLC, they're no longer going to be supporting this game. Cough cough, Free Kingdoms. So let's take a look at the possible races and factions and see how that could be worked into and implemented. And if you'd like me to expand on each of the different races and factions in their own videos, which will be much greater length, let me know in the comments below, and then I could probably do so. We're going to have to talk about the Dogs of War a little bit. Now, I don't think that they're going to have any cities and so on. I think that they might work as a horde faction or maybe a pseudo horde, as it kind of makes sense considering that they are all mercenaries. Now, in my honest opinion, we've already seen the possible Dogs of War mechanic in a Total War Saga Troy when it comes to Rhesus and Memnon, where Memnon has this really interesting way of recruiting units from different cultures, as that's all in its own window and all that, and I've already talked about it in its own video. I'll have that linked in the description below just in case you want to check it out. But as I said in yesterday's video, as the Dogs of War themselves are comprised, and I'm talking about the army book, of Estalians, Talians, Arabians, and loads of other different races and factions, then this can be further expanded upon, as the race itself would already have Estalians, Talians, and some Arabians. Then they would just need to kind of add to it to be able to then make a unique race or faction. So one legendary lord, or maybe even two, just to add in, here we go, a Estalian, a Talian, and a Arabian. So you can see where their possible legendary lords can start, and keep in mind that yes, some people would probably want 3 or 4 legendary lords, but the countries themselves are very small. If they want to milk DLC, they can make 1, maybe 2 extra, depending on where you go. Obviously, there's New World colonies and all that, which could even add as a potential start position for maybe even Estalia and Talia, so depending on who you pick, it just starts the faction over there, and it could be possible it's just alternating starts, I guess, which we've already seen in Warhammer 2. Obviously, all these different factions, Arabi, Estalia, and Talia, do have their own culture, their own aesthetic. We've already seen that being done with earlier lore. We know that they're different. Any little bits of lore do make them drastically different. So that's already, what, 3 minor race packs? You've already got something there? It kind of works already. It already adds to a decent amount of more DLC. We get normally around 3 to 4 different DLC packs a year. That covers us to a year. Obviously, it wouldn't be all of these in one year because they'd have to split that out between Lord packs or main race packs like Ind and Koresh, because I'm expecting them to have their full race packs and not be minor. Obviously, keep in mind that any legendary lords that might be displaced can be displaced, because we've seen that happen in Warhammer 2. It's just something I need to reiterate because I'm feeling that I'm going to get a lot of comments on that. Alright, let's talk about Albion, because a lot of people seem to get very confused about it. No, it's not a part of Norsca, it's its own nation, it's got its own unique culture and so on. They are more in the style of Celts and Picts. Albion, funny enough, is very important to Warhammer lore. It's a place where time doesn't really flow as people expect. Now, when it comes to Albion, we do already know about some leaders, we know about some characters, hell, we know about some possible lord and hero choices with the Truthsayer and the Dark Emissary. Now, what we're expecting is Marauders, Horsemen, we're expecting Centaurs, because there are Centaurs there. Pretty much a lot of stuff which we already have in Warhammer 3, which would use the same rigging and would need probably the same animations in most cases, barring the Centaurs, because the Centaurs aren't Centaurs. So they could easily take some stuff from, say, for example, the Norskans for the big style unit groups, Wood Elf rigs for the more skirmishing types of troops, and then a few unique things like, obviously, the Fen Beast, the Albion Giants, unless they use the baseline one, because they seem to like using the baseline one, and just a few things just to make it a bit more unique. But the rigging and a lot of the animations would stay exactly the same. Albion itself is very small, and it could provide for an interesting start position for a unique race. We've already seen that with OVN Lost Factions, and it would pretty much work like that. That's literally all they own. Again, some legendary lords do start there, but they can easily be moved, as we've seen that happen before, and it would present for something very different. You'd be playing a Norsca-style faction, but you wouldn't be relying on big monsters. In fact, you'll be relying mostly on cavalry and infantry with some heavy uses of magic. The thing is, for myself as a Warhammer Fantasy fan, I've always been really curious about Albion because, well, they've always given little tidbits and they always expanded upon it, but we never really got to see Albion in its true light. I'm talking about armies and so on. We did technically visit it in 6th edition with Shadows over Albion, but even then that wasn't really enough, and it would be interesting to see that fleshed out. But seeing that a lot of stuff is reusable, it is simple enough, and Games Workshop would probably be keen because then more miniatures and, well, you know, that's what kind of sells. It's cross-promotion. We already know that Games Workshop do like to cross-promote. We've seen that with Cafe already, and it's very possible, because of the mounting evidence for Koresh, that we're going to see that there too. So for another minor race pack, this is something that I know a lot of people have been wanting, the Hobgoblin Carnate. So, as we are expecting the Chaos Dwarfs being released eventually, possibly at some point this year, I hope, a large variety of different Hobgoblins should realistically feature in the Chaos Dwarf race pack because, well, they were in the army books, that's how it worked. There were many Hobgoblin slaves in the Chaos Dwarf armies. But people do want a proper Hobgoblin Carnate faction, and while I might not understand why, I'm not really into goblins, it is still very possible to see them as a playable faction, as, well, Games Workshop once again have been hinting towards the Hobgoblin Carnate as its own thing in recent Old World posts. So, yeah, this kind of works. Again, this is the whole minor race pack thing, which would add into the Chaos Dwarfs as its own thing. Just like DLC for DLC, if the Dogs of War theory I have works out, this could easily be the same way for a Hobgoblin Carnate. The Chaos Dwarfs come up first, and then later down the line, they can expand on the Hobgoblins with what they already have, and then make it a new faction, so you can just play as Hobgoblins if you so wish. Plus, Plus, we already know where the hobgoblins are more or less starting, so yeah, it's easy enough to put that icon there. Mind you, they are in loads of different places of the Warhammer Fantasy world. I'm just going with an educated guess, and yeah. Next, something that I really want, and I don't know how the community feels about it, but it would be cool to get Halflings, mainly because they are part of the Empire, so in all intents and purposes, this would be a Empire faction, but in a very different way, taking again from mechanics from a Total War Saga Troy. Keep in mind that the Troy team is now working on Warhammer 3, so very possible. Halflings are exactly what they are. Halflings, you know, hobbits. They're not a very big race, they're pretty much mostly found around the Moot, which is in the lands of the Empire, and the way I see it is they'd be allied with the Empire, and as they take over places of the Empire, then they get access to more Imperial units, or you could actively work with them and you would have like a reinforcement system like Marcus Wolfheart, because that kind of works, just kind of the Empire sending aid to the Moot and so on. It works kind of thematically. You only need one Legendary Lord, 2 would be nice, but again, these are races that you'd only need 1 or 2. And this could work really well with, say, for example, normal Empire campaigns, where eventually you could get an event to confederate the Moot and you'd get access to some Halfling units. Their roster wouldn't be massively big, but it would be enough to just play and have some fun. I wouldn't imagine them being the strongest faction, but it would be a hard mode faction, I guess. Admittedly, out of all the ones talked about, the Halflings would probably require the most work, considering that, well, there's nothing there that could be used to reuse in a sense, you know, rigs and animations and so on. But I imagine that they would probably do it just for the meme factor. It could probably sell quite well if they promote it well enough. It just very much depends. Out of all the ones we're speaking about today, I think that this one has the least chance, but you never know. Next, we would have the Amazons. Now, the Amazons themselves are quite curious because technically they're allies with the Lizardmen, but they do fight every so often. However, this is a race of primal warrior women, and a lot of people have been asking for this. It's very popular. It's something that could be done. There's a lot of different animations that they could take from elves, because I'm imagining that they would have a similar style to, say, for example, the Wood Elves in terms of combat. Possibly being paired up with some feral beasts like Carnosaurs, Ballistillodons, and all that type of stuff, just to give it a bit more of a feel, and you've pretty much got a minor faction. Animation and rigs, no problem. If it's the case that this could be justified as the biggest thing, because, you know, Lustria is really, really big. Of course, when it comes to these types of things, keep in mind that a lot of this might be DLC, which is only available in Mortal Empires, but I imagine that they'd do something like, oh, if you own all 3, you get a nice discount, or something like that. That's the only thing that really worries me about these types of things, but they do need to flesh out the world a little bit more, especially if we're getting the full world. Just to add in a little bit of flavor with different minor races and factions. Again, DLC, very important for the longevity of a game. Again, 1 Legendary Lord is perfectly fine and you're good to go. I mean, it's probably what's going to work the best here. 1 or 2 Legendary Lords. I know I'm saying this a lot, but a lot of people want 4 for different races. Potentially, we could see something for Marienburg too. Keep in mind that Marienburg is not part of the Empire. It has been independent for a long, long time, and we are exploring them in Warhammer the Old World. They are their own nation at this point, so they probably have some unique units, some different types of pirate weaponry and so on. If anything, maybe the Sartosan one is going to be that, but it would be really interesting to see a human skirmishing faction, but mostly focused on skirmishing and guns. I don't know, it could be really interesting. Once again, 1 Legendary Lord, but that's all you pretty much need, unless they do like a pseudo-horde one who's in the ocean, because there are a lot of seafarers. But seeing as we're seeing an expansion to Marienburg with Warhammer the Old World again, it's likely that we're going to see unique units, its own unique faction. It's going to be easy enough to translate, and it'll probably be using the same animations and rigs from the Empire, because, you know, humans, interchangeable. The last thing I could think of which would give us a unique experience would be Crack and Track. These are the Norse Dwarfs, a relatively small kingdom which was kind of abandoned by the rest of the dwarfs. Well, it's not really what happened. There was a lot of, well, miscommunication, then there was a warp storm, and there was a lot of stuff. But these dwarfs themselves are not as technologically advanced as either the normal dwarfs or even the Chaos Dwarfs. In fact, the Norse dwarfs are more primal. They make use of very, very primal type of technology, mostly catapults and crossbows and so on, rather than going full gunpowder. There's no gunpowder. There's always been little bits of tidbits when it comes to this type of faction, because we know that they kind of work with the Norskins sometime, and that they do have some monsters or potential monsters in their ranks. So it would be kind of cool if we saw a unique type of dwarf faction, which was just this. The Norse dwarfs also did have their own dedicated army list and so on, very similar to most of the factions that we've spoken about, where it's all in different places, and they did have some playable faction. I believe that was in 3rd or 4th edition, but even then, it's not that much. It can be expanded upon though, and it would be using a lot of the same rigs and animation as the standard dwarves, because they're still dwarfs after all. Again, one legendary lord is perfectly fine, and I think that that would work out quite well. It will give people a different start. If they like dwarfs, they can play as a different dwarf. Even though we have chaos dwarfs, you would get a non-chaos aligned faction, which would be so drastically different that we'd have 3 different types of unique playstyles. As you can see, that already adds in a lot of potential DLC for factions that wouldn't really need anything else, so just enough to have, say, 19 units in total, or maybe a little bit less. There'd be a lot of stuff which is kind of reskinned, which would be understandable, especially since Creative Assembly do use reskinning and retexturing a lot when it comes to these types of games. If you haven't noticed that, it's just because they do it kind of well. But it is very obvious once you start looking into all the units and start looking at the animations as much as I do, because, you know, few hundred hours into Warhammer 3 already, you kind of becomes very noticeable. I love the idea of having this. It's got so much potential because that's already a lot of DLC that carries us to basically 2 years of longevity, more or less. This is by their usual release standards. Keep in mind that the last 2 years have been a bit weird because, well, you know, working from home and all that. We still don't know how that works, but if they do want to support the game for many, many years, as they said, minor factions are a great way to go. Like I said very early on into the video, a lot of the base game races for Warhammer 1 and Warhammer 2 are pretty much done. If you go into my Missing Units and Lords series, those show that there's really not that much left. I mean, even the Demons of Chaos are pretty much almost done too, which is why I thought that Monogods was going to be a weird thing, because unless Games Workshop start releasing new units, Creative Assembly can't make them. This is a very important thing to note. If you guys haven't realized by now, everything when it comes to new units and so on has to go through Games Workshop. And yes, there will be some new stuff in the future for Warhammer the Old World, which will likely turn into DLC here, but even then I don't think that there's going to be that much new stuff, mainly because I know Games Workshop so well, and if they can sell you 20-year-old models, they will, and they still do. But let me know what you guys think about this. If you want me to go into individual videos going into each of the lore and possible armies for all of the different minor factions, let me know in the comments below. I'll be happy to do so. In fact, I've already kind of written a script for one because I was just like, ooh, this could work, and I just kind of got lost in the moment. But let me know what you guys think, as it will take a bit of time to actually work throughout a series like this. I did cover most of them a few years ago, however that was mostly based on a tabletop aspect, but now we know a lot more on how Total War Warhammer works, especially with Warhammer 3 and all these different mechanics that were introduced in Troy, Three Kingdoms and all that, that there could be some really interesting stuff to talk about. But with that, my friends, we've come to the end of our video. Thank you so much for watching. If you did enjoy the video, might I suggest giving the video a like, or even subscribing to the channel, as it really does help us out. In the description section below are various links to different social media platforms such as Facebook, Instagram and Discord. Also in the description section is an affiliate link with Element Games where you could buy loads of hobby-based products, not just Warhammer, for 10 to 25% off. Making a purchase using that link and also our special code, which is also in the description, supports the channel at no extra cost to you, which we think is rather cool. A big thank you to our patrons. Your support means the world to us. It's amazing that people want to help a small channel like us grow and get to a higher level of content. A big thank you to Gibraltar LUSC, Ryan Bertsche, Andrew Prince and Okro for subscribing to us at our Fane level. You guys are super cool. And a big thank you to Edward Yule, VS Vasan, Aaron Whitman and Shaggy for subscribing to us at our King level. Honestly, we can't thank you all enough. And lastly, a big thank you to all of you for liking, sharing and commenting on these videos. Honestly, it's because of you guys that the channel has been growing at such a great pace lately, so we can't thank you all enough. But with that, my friends, thank you so much for watching once again, and we shall see you all again very, very soon. Have a good day.